The Philippine President Duterte lashes out at the UN for criticizing his crackdown on crime. The world body raises concerns about extrajudicial killings of suspects, undermining the cartels or the courtroom. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. The President of the Philippines is known for following through on his threats. His latest one, to withdraw the Philippines from the United Nations. UN criticism of how he runs his country has angered Rodrigo Duterte. He says he's going to encourage China and African countries to also leave the UN and create a new global organization.
What have you done for the world, Mr. United Nations, and your expert? You know, when he comes here, you tell him straight. Mayor Duterte would only ask 5 questions to prove that you are stupid. I do not want to insult you, but maybe we'll just have to decide to separate from the United Nations. If you're that disrespectful, we'll just leave the organization.
Now, Duterte's verbal attack comes after 2 UN human rights experts said the president's crackdown on crime might be illegal. It's a policy he's been pushing since his presidential campaign.
All of you who are into drugs, I will really kill you. I have no patience for that. I have no middle ground there. Either you kill me or I will kill you idiots.
Well, Duterte speaking there before his presidential election. And since his victory, the hard talk on drugs has become even more aggressive. He publicly accused a list of politicians, police officers and judges of being part of the illegal drug trade. The president encourages citizens to carry out vigilante justice, to kill anyone suspected of buying or selling heroin, crack, meth or other drugs. Police say more than 600,000 drug dealers and users have turned themselves in to avoid being killed. And around 900 suspected drug traffickers have been killed since Duterte won the presidential election in May. Let's bring our guests into the show now. We have joining us from Manila, Richard Heydarian. He's a political science professor at Salle University. In London, we have Chhoa Howard, Philippine researcher with Amnesty International. And finally, joining us via Skype in Manila, we have Criselda Yabes, author and columnist with Asia Sentinel. Thank you all for joining us. Let me start with Rachel. So Duterte saying there the UN's got it wrong. How solid is the evidence that authorities, the police, are responsible for committing extrajudicial killings?
Well, as far as Amnesty International is concerned, there have been hundreds of killings in the Philippines since President Duterte came into power at the beginning of July. In fact, there were killings even before he came into power when he won elections on May 10th. There has been a spike in killings in the country, and we're concerned that there have been unlawful killings, that there have been extrajudicial executions. What we are calling for is for an end to the war on drugs as it stands, to his policies, his shoot-to-kill policies in the war on drugs. We are calling for all people to be protected from summary killings and from extrajudicial executions, because right now anyone can kill anyone in the Philippines and get away with it.
But Rachel, what do you make of his comeback there? He says, look, you should be counting the bodies of the victims rather than what he calls the drug dealers and criminals.
Well, I don't think that that's the rule of law. That is not the rule of law. That is a recipe for lawlessness. And what we are calling for is an investigation into the killings that have taken place, and for a return to the rule of law, which relies on evidence, which relies on due process, which relies on fair legal procedures. That is true justice, and that's what Amnesty International is urging the Philippine government to implement.
All right, let's head over to Richard in Manila, get the view from the Philippines. Are authorities there just gunning down anyone who looks like he's a drug dealer or drug user? Is that what's going on in your country?
Well, there seems to be such allegations, but investigations really have to move forward. the Senate, the Philippine Senate, led by Senator De Lima, is pushing for investigations to make sure that there are no extrajudicial measures used to deal with the issue of proliferation of drugs. The Commission on Human Rights is also pushing for more cooperation on the part of the executive branch. But it seems, as far as President Duterte is concerned, this is his conviction, that he wants to really deal with the issue of crime and proliferation of drugs through draconian measures. In fact, one of the terms that the administration used was shock and awe. Remember, during the campaign period, Duterte promised to suppress criminality and proliferation of drugs within 3 to 6 months. And he's expecting that within that 3 to 6 months, which is also his honeymoon period, he'll be given maximum leeway to deal with the issue of crime and proliferation of drugs. So he has tended to be not very cooperative or critical of efforts by other branches of the government and other independent commissions to launch investigations. So at this point in time, it's allegations, but so far it's very clear that the Duterte administration does not want any
interference. It's been investigated by people
especially
like
if it comes
Amnesty
from abroad.
International, right? It has been investigated by some human rights groups, as we're hearing on this show. Do you think most people want to hear what Rachel was saying there, that this war against drugs in the way it's been done, that should end?
Right. I think among the intelligentsia, among the legal community, and the local media here, there's a consensus that there should be an investigation here because there may have been some circumvention of the due process. But if you look at the broader Philippine public, they seem to be either supportive, passively supportive, or perhaps out of fear or concern, they're not really outraged or not coming out and opposing it. I mean, Duterte enjoys a 91% popularity rating among people, and if you talk to people across the demographics, across socioeconomic classes, a lot of them are saying, well, maybe there have been some sort of circumvention of the due process, but the old alternative system was not working. The rigmarole of the Philippine judicial system is not the way forward. Perhaps it's time for us to employ much more shock and awe and draconian measures. So it seems, interestingly, the Philippine public is not very much outraged by what's happening, even though the international community, the United Nations, Amnesty International, and some senators and Commission on Human Rights have been crying, have been engaged in an outcry.
All right, Griselda, how much of a real spike in killings of suspected drug offenders has there been since Duterte came to power?
Well, there's obviously been an increase since he came to power. What he does is he starts off with a list of people he suspects were drug dealers. But the problem with this list is that it's not always accurate. That's what he did when he became president, when he started out calling out names of police officers who were involved. But the problem here is there's also a contradiction in what he does, because with this list saying that, the police are involved, the judges are involved, and some local officials are involved, well, let's start off with the police. He says that, but at the same time, he also allows the police to go out and carry out his order, which is to shoot to kill anyone that they suspect to be drug addicts. So that's where the problem lies. You don't know whether the police are there themselves involved or not, and so you don't know whether people they've killed are actually criminals or are innocent, and that's the problem of the whole thing.
No, that's an interesting point. I want to take it back to Richard in Manila. Richard, I mean, how do people feel about that? If the president is saying basically almost every institution in the country is corrupt and involved in the drug cartel or the drug trade, I mean, how can you expect people to have faith in a sort of loosening or relaxing of, shall we say, the rules of engagement with drug dealers and give more power to the police and the authorities just to gun down suspects or people who resist arrest, I think is the way he framed it.
Yeah, I mean, without a question, what brought Duterte into office was this grievance politics, this sense that the system as it is was not working, that the old elite and the establishments were not effective in terms of dealing with law and order issues. In fact, in February this year, there was a survey that came out, and according to that survey, according to majority of the population, the number two issue that the next leader has to deal with is proliferation of drugs. And it seems for a long time, previous administrations were not paying enough attention to it. Although though most experts will agree that proliferation of drugs is definitely not the #1 issue in the country. But on a subjective level, there's a sense that it's a problem and previous administrations not dealt with it. And of course, Duterte presented himself as a person who can deal with it very effectively. He said that when he was the mayor of Davao, he was able to effectively deal with this issue, albeit perhaps using draconian measures. So now that he has come into office, it's not he only in the office, he has also brought some of the people that he used to work with in Davao. For instance, the current police chief, Mr. De La Rosa, who was also the police chief in Davao, is now the police chief of the entire Philippines. So he's bringing his own people from Davao, putting them in charge of key positions in the government. And essentially what he's saying is that maybe you don't trust the Philippine state, but you have to trust my administration because my record is clear.
All right,
I am not
let me jump in there. I want to bring
so far,
Rachel into the discussion,
people.
if I may, and ask her, let's focus then on his track record in Davao. How good was it in terms of establishing a stable, peaceful society, cleaning the area of drugs, but perhaps also in a way that was meeting the requirements of law and order?
Well, President Duterte has quite a record in Davao. Human rights organizations have documented that he was linked to Davao death squads. He has sort of alluded to this fact in the past and almost admitted it publicly. So certainly it's concerning to see that his record in Davao as 20 years of mayor also used these types of measures, used extrajudicial killings that were documented there, and used excessive use of force by police to crack down on crime. Davao still has, I think, the third highest crime rate in the country. So I think what people are forgetting here is that violence is actually not a long-term solution to drug crime. And what we need, what is needed in a long-term solution to drug crime is actually to address the root causes of crime, which include fulfilling other human rights, such as economic, social, and cultural rights. We see that in this war on drugs, poor people, the marginalized, are being targeted. They are those most involved in drug crime for obvious reasons. This is the way that they earn an income. And so these types of root causes are being completely ignored by the current president.
Before we get into the root causes, I want to take that point back to Richard and say, Richard, as we heard from Rachel there, still a very high crime rate in Davao linked to drugs. What are we talking about when you say things like, you know, people look at his record in Davao and say, well, you know, this is something we want nationwide?
Right. I think it's a question of perception. Politics is about perception. We can debate about facts and objective reality. But the thing is that I think Duterte was able to convince the people that he was able to deal with the issue of criminality and law and order quite effectively while he was in charge of Davao. And it seems that message has resonated with significant portion of people, and that's why he was elected into office, and now he has very high approval ratings. I think the more fundamental issue here, which we're not discussing, is what is the state of debate in the Philippines with respect to the issue of human rights and due process. Because in democracies, those are supposed to be sacrosanct, non-debatable, non-negotiable issues. But based on my experience of having conversation with people across the demographic classes, across the ideological spectrum, it seems a lot of Filipinos are now debating whether human rights or due process are negotiable. For some of them, maybe sometimes you have to put aside human rights, you have to put aside due process if that is the way to create law and order. Again, as Democrats and human rights advocates, we may disagree with that, but the political reality in the Philippines is that those values don't seem to resonate the way they should in an established democracy. And that shows how fledgling and how fragile the Philippine democratic values are.
We'll pick up on them in a minute. I want to go back to Griselda, though. I could see you angling to get in on this. Go ahead, Griselda.
No, it's just that we have to put Davao in perspective. 20 years ago, it was described as something similar to Nicaragua. So you have the insurgency, they're hemmed in by the insurgency. You had the communist insurgency there, and you had the Muslim insurgency surrounding Davao City, which is a city of 1.5 million people. That's a small population compared to what we have now in the entire country, which is 100 million people. In Davao then, there were vigilantes roaming around, there were rebels roaming around. The place was like a ghost town. And when Duterte came into the picture, he was a prosecutor at that time, a government prosecutor, so he knew the ins and outs. He knew how people could get away with things. And that's what he tried to deal with. He became a strong man in that city. And over time, 20 years, it became something close to what people would describe as Singapore. It's nice, it's pleasant, no traffic, you can walk in the streets at night. Although, yes, the crime rate is still high. It's not something that you can eliminate. And people basically turned a blind eye to the killings because for them, they would rather see criminals killed than have their lives be put up their threat. So that's what happened.
Griselda, it sounds like you're saying that basically his approach worked in Davao. Is it working now nationwide since he's come to office? Is this policy reducing or impacting the drug trade somehow?
I would say no, in the sense that you have 100 million people and not every province is similar to Davao. But you also have people in provinces where they see this problem and they don't want to be affected by it and they feel like, well, yes, a strong man will handle the situation. But people are not, it's just been, a month and a half. We don't know exactly where we're going. We don't know how this is going to turn out to be. We don't know what it means when he tells the entire world, we want to leave the UN is stupid. We don't know the implications of that and how it's going to affect a country of 100 million people. He could talk that way to people in Davao because he knows them. He knows who the police chief is. He knows who the corrupt policemen are. He knows the criminals. And, it's a small city where everyone can have a certain level of intimacy. But if you're talking about 100 million people, and you tell the cops to go out and kill them, you don't even know who these police officers are. So it's not the same. He's putting a small town, a small town scenario into something bigger, and we don't know how it's going to affect us as a country. And he takes it as a personal affront.
Let me bring Rachel in. Well, with points which were made, Rachel, by both Richard and Griselda there. You do hear this sentiment from Filipinos who say, things were pretty bad before. We're tired of the situation. We're tired of the corruption. We're tired of the drug violence. And, any other concerns might have to take a back seat. They want things to work. And if police are saying now that 600,000 drug dealers, we're told, and users are turning themselves in, well, if that's come at the price, the argument goes, of some civil liberties and human rights, this is at least a change and progress. How do you respond to that, Rachel?
Well, I think we have to look at evidence of counter-narcotic operations in other parts of the world. I think Rizaldo's right that we don't know exactly how this is going to pan out. We don't know. This has only been going on for 6 weeks. But I think what we can look at is other examples where excessive use of force has been used by police to try and counter drug crime in other countries, such as Mexico, such as the favelas of Rio de Janeiro. Amnesty International documented extrajudicial killings under very similar circumstances last year in Rio. And has this led to a long-term solution to drug crime? Absolutely not. There's no evidence that it has. And I think that Filipinos are going to be bitterly disappointed. And it is very concerning. It is very concerning that Filipinos have lost trust in their justice system so much that they are willing to let police take the law into their own hands, and for vigilantes, unknown hitmen, to take the law into their own hands and track down supposed suspected drug criminals. But this is not the solution. The solution to crime in any country is for due process, is for the fair legal procedures to be meted out properly by courts, and the court systems are the only systems and institutions which should be allowed to mete out punishments, because otherwise...
But Rachel, they don't trust the courts, apparently. They don't trust the authorities.
Yes, well, that must be addressed. The court systems clearly are not working properly in the Philippines, that people have lost faith in the justice system, but that faith must be restored. That is the only long-term solution to drug crime and indeed other crimes in the Philippines.
Okay, Richard, I want to come back. Actually, a point which you opened about how people's values may be changing in a democratic society and system, and perhaps one of the points we are missing here is to talk about why. And it's not just crime, is it? According to a 2013 survey conducted by the Office of the Ombudsman, it showed that there is a relationship between poverty and corruption, and that's what people believe. is it a case that people see that their economic problems, the poverty that they live in, is because of too many politicians who are corrupt, perhaps taking kickbacks and corruption linked to drug gangs? Is that why there is this sort of evolvement of values that says, let's just go after the corrupt and the drug people now?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the Duterte administration has announced, now we have to verify these numbers, that crime rates have dropped by more than 50% in the first 50 days of the Duterte administration. Again, we are yet to triangulate that number, but they're making this claim that actually overall crime rates are going down because the police and law enforcement agencies are more proactive and the head of state is behind them. So there's that argument. But in fairness, as far as Duterte is concerned, the argument he's putting forward is not only fighting drugs and criminality. His more fundamental argument is, first, we are an Asian country, and in Asian countries we have Asian values, which is very similar to the kinds of arguments that Lee Kuan Yew, Mahathir Mohamad, and other strongman leaders in Asia were making a few decades ago. For instance, in State of Nation address, he said that do not use human rights as a shield to destroy the country. So he's saying collective interests, law and order should go beyond issues like human rights and basic civil liberties. So there's an ideological debate going on. The second thing he's saying is that first you have to create law and order so that you can create economic prosperity. You know, he always cites the examples of other countries like Singapore, but he also cites the example of Davao. So for instance, Davao is not only known, according to Duterte and his supporters, as a supposedly, peaceful place, but if you go to Davao, for instance, it only takes 48 hours for you to process a business license. And if you talk a lot to hedge funds, to big businessmen, to investors from abroad, a lot of them will tell you that actually, when you look at Davao, it's a very investment-friendly place. So the argument that Duterte is making here is that we have to deal with this law and order issue on the issue of drug proliferation and law and order, and eventually this will create the foundation
but
for
Richard,
the economic
the counter-argument to that
is
over the long term, I think the argument that people like
Yeah.
Rachel would make, over the long term, that doesn't become sustainable, because if you lose your grip on law and order, then it turns into chaos, which businesses don't like.
Yeah, that's absolutely the risk there. And I think this is why the Duterte administration should move to the next phase of dealing with these issues. As you correctly pointed out a while ago, 540,000 people, according to the government, have surrendered themselves because they were supposedly engaging in drug trafficking, or they were drug users.
Right.
So the issue here is clearly rehabilitation. So when you have so many people saying that we need help from the state, maybe not all of them are really drug addicts, they were just on the list, but so many people are coming forward, and that means you have to invest in the judicial system, but you have to also invest in the healthcare system.
We've got about a minute and a half left, Richard.
So he has to have an exit strategy and transition to rehabilitation.
I'm going to try and give that minute and a half now to Griselda before we go. I could see you wanted to come in on this. Go ahead.
No, I just want to say we've been under a democracy for 30 years, and making things right, making things perfect takes a very, very, very long time. And part of the problem we had is that leaders in the past were not able to give us the progress that we were expecting out of a democracy. So here comes Rodrigo Duterte saying, I can do it because I did it in Davao. But it doesn't necessarily mean that what happened in Davao, the success that he's had in Davao, will translate into into a bigger story, about our country. So I don't know, we're trampling on rights here, we're trampling on things, on institutions that we've built over a period of time. And I don't know if we're going to slide back or if we're going to head towards a more, authoritarian rule, basically.
All right.
If he doesn't, he's the type of president to be, who doesn't want, who takes everything personally, who takes everything as every insult, every criticism as an affront, as a personal affront.
All right, I think we've still got actually 50 seconds left, I'm told. So I'm going to give it to Rachel for a final thought in 50 seconds. Go ahead.
Well, my final thought would be that what is good about the Philippines, as Griselda said, is that it is a democracy, and it's a fledgling fighting democracy. And there's many critics on the ground who are calling for Duterte's administration to be investigated and these killings to be looked into. And there is a Senate inquiry happening over the next couple of days where there is the opportunity to learn more about what has been going on over the past few weeks, how many killings exactly there have been in the Philippines, and under what circumstances they have been taking place. And this is an opportunity for the government to be held to account. Duterte has been diverting attention by talking about the UN and how the Philippines is going to leave the UN. But this attention should not be diverted from this inquiry, which is a very important step in understanding what is going on in the Philippines.
All right, I'm afraid we are out of time, so let's thank our guests very much. Richard Heydarian, Rachel Chhoa Howard and Criselda Yabez. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.